All right, I'm really excited for you guys to meet my friend Lu-Ann Kubicar. Lu-Ann is actually a partner with us on our Juice Plus team, but she is amazing because she's one of the people that is responsible, like she's a bigwig in the USDA for keeping all of our food supply safe. And, you know, I've talked to her several times, and every time I chat with her, I'm so intrigued by what really happens behind the scenes. And so I asked her to come on tonight just to share with you, a little bit more about what happens and, what we can do to stay safe, especially in the midst of all this other virus issue that we're dealing with now. So just a little bit about Lu-Ann. She's an animal health technician for the United States Department of Agriculture. She's also an animal plant health inspection service person. She's also in Veterinary Services. And she has been with the USDA for 34 years, so she knows her stuff. She's also been with Food and Safety Inspection for 10 years and 24 years with Veterinary Services. So she wears a lot of hats over there where she is. She lives in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania with her husband of 27 years. Her husband's name is Craig, and she has 2 children, Gabriel and Elizabeth. And her sister is actually also, Diana, is also a partner with Juice Plus and is the one that kind of shared with her about it. And it made a lot of sense to her, and she's going to share with you why that is as well. She grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania with 5 siblings. They raised sheep and beef. And she also has a Bachelor of Science degree in organizational leadership. So Lu-Ann, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to share with us.
Sure, you're welcome.
So tell us a little bit more. I kind of gave a synopsis that you keep our food supply safe, but share a little bit more about kind of what are your responsibilities and what do you do?
Okay. Sure. I'm not a big wheel. I'm at the bottom of the food chain here at USDA, but I'm on the ground in the field, which is okay. It's a good place to be. We're at the front lines protecting our food animals. Basically, that's what I do. I use I kind of explain it. The military is our first line of defense. We're the first line of defense to protect our food animals from foreign animal diseases and domestic diseases here in the U.S. That's the majority of what we do in veterinary services. We go to livestock markets, monitor the movement of cattle, sheep, goats, and across state lines. Our markets are federally approved, so we have to monitor to make sure that they're doing what they're required to do as per their approvals. We do exports. We export live animals out of the country. We monitor them to make sure that they're healthy, they're identified, and each animal has to be accounted for on the health certificate that goes with those animals when they leave the country. So we monitor taxidermies for their incoming shipments to make sure that no foreign pests come in on any of their shipments. We also do disease outbreaks. I've been out on a couple of those. The virulent Newcastle in California last year and the year before. I've been on Avian Influenza task force. I've been on a tuberculosis task force. This is over the course of the many years that I've been in USDA. We have these outbreaks on occasion, and I'm sure most folks heard about the avian influenza outbreak in Minnesota in 2015. So those are some of the things that we cover and some of the things that we do. So basically, we are first responders too, and we do that same thing that our nurses and doctors do for us. We do for our animals. We're out there protecting them, helping them to stay safe and remain healthy, so that they are a viable food source. So that's pretty much basically what we do.
That's amazing. So when I first met you, you were off to California because there was an outbreak of some virus. And I think I had no idea. I mean, I think we all know that there's viruses, but they're usually born from animal products, right?
Well, not necessarily. There are viruses out there, that affect both humans and animals. And virulent Newcastle does what we were fighting in California, and they continue to do that. So it's one of those diseases that moved in. It was a Mexican strain, came from Mexico, from the birds that were imported into the U.S. out there in California, and that's how. And we test birds all the birds that folks are using to sell, like if they have layers or they have broilers that they're going to market, they need to be monitored and tested to make sure that they don't have avian influenza, or that just that their birds are healthy. Generally, they're hoping not to find avian influenza or exotic Newcastle. They don't want those things in their flock, so they want them tested. And most states have a testing program to monitor the flocks to make sure, of course, that they stay safe and healthy as well. So.
Right, because otherwise it can go through the entire herd or flock, right?
It goes into the entire flock. Well, exotic Newcastle and high path avian influenza are both very, very diseases that hit a flock very fast and kill them all very fast. So part of the reason we put them down is before it spreads so fast that, like I said, it's very, viral Newcastle's not a pleasant way to go for the bird. So it's a respiratory disease, the same as avian influenza, same thing. And low path version of avian influenza, a lot of folks don't realize that we put birds down that have the low path version of it because it tends to mutate into high path avian influenza, which is both dangerous to the birds and it's also dangerous to us because we can also pick it up. So that's one of the reasons.
There's a lot of viruses that you guys see that typically will come into livestock or birds.
Well, yeah, it depends. Like I said, that's what we're out there to do. We monitor for tuberculosis and brucellosis are still, we still look for those. Food safety inspection still looks for TB in cattle. And of course, we don't have that issue in the, the upper part of the U.S. They still have the issue down in Texas. They will find, sporadic little outbreaks of it because of cattle coming in from Mexico. But for the most part, like I said, you don't see it very often, in Pennsylvania or New York or any place like that, usually because we don't import cattle from that far south generally. So
what are some of the other viruses that you see that come in that you have to worry about for food supply?
Well, most of what we're doing, as far as the viruses are concerned, we monitor avian influenza. Foot and mouth is another one, which was they had an outbreak of that in England in 2001, and that's when they had to have folks stay on their farms, and they also had to put down they had to incinerate their animals because foot and mouth spreads very quickly, and you can carry it off of the farm on your feet, on your boots, places like that. And when it broke there, it spread very quickly because they didn't realize they had it until it started to spread and, into other animals because it spreads into cattle, pigs, sheep, and goats and deer. But your dogs, cats, and horses do not get foot and mouth. So, but if your food animals are getting it, then you have an issue. So we have to very quickly try to put a stop to the movement of people and animals so that it doesn't continue to spread.
So that happens more often than what people think.
Well, like I said,
how often do you think?
Well, that particular time in England was brought in by a gentleman who fed garbage, untreated garbage, to his hogs from a foot and mouth country. A lot of folks don't understand garbage is, if you cook it to a proper temperature for 30 minutes, then you can kill any of that particular virus and feed that garbage to the hogs. And we're talking garbage with like meat byproducts in it. Bakery waste and vegetable waste is a different type of garbage that does not have to be treated in that fashion. But this particular version of it, the meat version of it, you do have to treat it. If you don't treat it before you feed it to your animals, and that garbage came from a foot and mouth country, then those animals picked it up. So, and then they shared it with the sheep on that gentleman's farm, which he had marketed. So it kind of spread all over England at the time. So foot and mouth is a foreign animal disease, which we do not have in the U.S. and we don't want here. So we are always on the lookout for that. And we have our lab up in Plum Island does all the testing as far as monitoring. They do all the tests. If it's someone calls and says, can you come test my animal because I think I have a foreign animal disease, our veterinarians go out and do the biologic sampling and send that to Plum Island, which is where that, whatever it happens to be, is identified, and then it will let us know if we do have one or we don't have one. But as of now, we don't have that in the U.S. But like I said, avian influenza is something we continue to battle, usually almost every year in some fashion or form. And generally it's low path. We've been working very hard to keep the high path from ever coming back like it did in Pennsylvania in I believe it's 1983. They had it here very badly in Pennsylvania, Lancaster County area. So, but that was
What
before
happens
my
if,
time.
happens if it slips out, and can it then cross-contaminate to people? Is that
Well,
the concern?
if it becomes high path, yes, because we can breathe it in our lungs and carry it from barn to barn. Plus, we can also suffer the same symptoms that birds are having, and it can be, people can die of it, but generally that doesn't happen to people in the U.S. for the most part because we don't live with our birds. Where some countries, they live in the same area, the same building with their animals, and then it has a tendency to crop up that way in those particular countries. So, for the most part, but we're always incredibly careful when we're dealing with those animals because we wear the proper PPE, which is your face mask, your Tyvek boots, the whole 9 yards. We're suited up just like folks are right now, protecting our each of us while they're dealing with the coronavirus. It's the same type of thing, except we do it for animals. They're doing it for people. But for us, we feel a lot more comfortable because we're trained to deal with this sort of thing, not on a people level, but on an animal level. So we understand and know what kind of biosecurity is needed to keep that virus from moving, in people as well as in animals. So.
Right. Yeah. So will you explain the process of what happens if all of a sudden we find a herd or a flock that is infected with a virus of whatever? What's the process? Like, what do they do?
The process for that is usually they go out. The animals have to be tested by the lab, so samples are taken and they're sent to the lab. And as soon as we identify that it is whatever virus it is, for example, if it's low path avian influenza, then they go about doing indemnity for the animals because the government does pay the producer for those animals. And then they set a price for whatever those particular animals are, depending on whether broilers, layers, whatever type of bird they are, turkeys, whatever. They'll set the price. Then once that's set into motion and everything's agreed upon, then we'll go out and we'll put the animals down. Depending on what it is, we usually use foam with that. And once we put them down, then they're usually either composted or buried, depending on where you live and where this is going on. Different states have different rules. So, and different, as far as EPA rules, as far as that goes. So a lot of people if they can compost, they'll try to compost, and they are allowed to do that. They're allowed to compost. It has to be supervised composting because we have to make sure that the virus is killed through the composting and doesn't and you don't have outside animals have access to the compost pile and can, pull animals out of there and that sort of thing. So it's something that has to be very controlled. And usually if they compost, they'll try to do it in the barn to keep all that in there, that nothing has access to it. And then once that is completely done, and then the barn's cleaned and disinfected and then empty, it retests for the virus. And if it's virus free, then we allow those folks to repopulate with their flock. They're allowed to repopulate their flock. Because of course, if they put new birds in there, they don't want to reinfect them. So that's why they clean and disinfect and make sure that the barn is free of the virus. So. It's basically like when you clean your house, the same thing. If you're cleaning something, you want to clean it well. So they do the same for the animals because they want the animals to be in a healthy environment when they put the new birds in.
Yeah. And what about like eggs? Because I know sometimes you are getting rid of a whole huge amount of eggs.
Right. Well, they're either composted or buried. That's the same premise with them, and they will dump those as well if it's a layer house as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that they do that testing because I know, back in the my high school days, people were opening up raw eggs and putting them in their shakes and thinking that was okay. It's probably not a good idea, is it?
Well, most of them are, if they're processed out, I'm not sure the processing for eggs because I don't work with egg processing, so I can't tell you specifically what they do. But, and most, like I said, I believe if you cook your food properly, you're not going to have any issues with anything in particular. That's right. The most of it. If people cook their food well and they handle it safely, they shouldn't have any, they're not going to have to worry about any foodborne illness.
Including coronavirus. So the other question I was going to add to the things I was going to ask you tonight was on CNBC today. There was somebody saying they were concerned that you could pick up COVID-19 from mishandling of food. And what do you think about that?
Well, that's not how that works. It doesn't work that way. So, and you know, right, like I said, it's a person to person thing where you're going to, and honestly, if you cook that food, if it was handled correctly and you cooked your food, you probably wouldn't pick anything up. It's the same as the, you know, as salmonella or any foodborne illness. If you cook your food properly to the proper temperature, you handle it, you make sure you wash your hands when you handle it. And yeah, like I said, you shouldn't have any issue with that as far as that goes. But I did not hear that today. So that was the first I heard that from you.
Yeah. So they didn't know how to answer the question, which I thought was kind of funny. But so as far as handling of your food, wash it, separate cutting boards, all that.
Well, yeah, that I believe is the common sense approach. If you're going to handle your meat and you're going to use a cutting board, fine. Make sure you wash your hands. And then once you handled your meat, put it in whatever pan you're going to cook it in, and you put it in the oven. Make sure you wash your hands again if you're going to handle your vegetables, and use a separate cutting board for those. There are plenty of, you can wash your vegetables. You can use their sprays on the market that you can use. I'm not advocating for anybody. I just know that they're out there. People have used them. And also you can use salt water for your lettuce and cabbage, because that gets the little cutworms off them, because sometimes you don't actually see those when you're washing off your lettuce and your cabbage. But that sort of thing is easy to remedy as well. So, but yeah, common sense prevails.
Just like doing the salt in some water, or
right. Yep. Just put salt water in there and you can just soak it in there. And if there is any cutworms, they'll just come off, because the salt water, they don't like the salt. So they come off. And that's, you know, most of the restaurants do that with when they soak that stuff to make sure that there's nothing on their lettuce when they serve salads to folks. So, yeah.
So we don't get any foodborne bacterias as well.
Well, I don't know if that it cuts that. It just gets those little cutworms off of there. They don't
want cutworms
very long. So,
yeah.
But yeah,
want cutworms for dinner, not me.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of extra protein either. So we're good there.
What other interesting things do you want to tell us tonight? I know you had a few things that you wanted to add to the things I wanted to ask you.
Well, like I said, I had just gone over all your, like I said, all the different questions you had asked me, and I'm like, okay, we'll work through it this way. But basically, like I said, I just want folks to know that from farm to table, you know, USDA is working very hard to protect the food that we have out there, as far as the live animal part of it and the processed part of it, because my colleagues in food safety and inspection, which I was a part of many years ago, are still doing their due diligence over there. They also do sampling at that end of it to make sure, of course, that there's no issues with any they sample the dead animals, as far as, well, I can say dead animals, just sample the meat. I don't want to say dead animals because people get offended to that, but they sample the meat and send samples to the lab, because they test it for, you know, salmonella or any other foodborne, you know, contaminant that could be in there. You know, if there's any fecal material in there, that would get picked up, you know, in a sample. And of course, you don't want that in your meat. And if when they're removing the internal organs of an animal, sometimes things break and they have to trim those pieces off. So I want folks to understand that USDA is doing their due diligence, you know, in food safety and inspection by, they trim that off. They don't wash it off. A lot of people think they wash it off. No, they don't wash it off. They have to trim it off. Those are the regs. And they are very, very particular about humane slaughter as far as that goes. A lot of folks are concerned about that being done in the right fashion as well. Like I said, I've been away from them for 24 years. I worked for them for 10 and then came to BS from there. But like I said, we work closely with them still on many things, because I still visit the processing plants as well. So like I said, I know those folks over there are working as hard as we are here to try to make sure that our food remains safe, wholesome, and healthy for folks to eat. Like I said, I'm just giving you all information. I'm speaking as a consumer just like you are. So
yeah. So Patsy has a question. She says, if corona is expected to have started in bats, how do we protect our livestock from bats? And do they check the barn very often? That's a great question.
I honestly don't know about, as far as the bats are concerned. I didn't realize, I don't know. Bats carry rabies. I can tell you that I do know. And you don't want to handle them barehanded or anything like that. As far as I know, they may carry it. I don't know. I'm not a veterinarian, so I couldn't speak to that. That's why I said I'm not going to answer questions that I can't answer. So I'm trying to be very honest
And that's still debatable whether that really came from bats, and we're not sure. And I think it was, they're saying somebody probably ate it or something. So that
I
doesn't
have
really
no
make any
idea
sense
on
because
that. Yeah.
I know. So anyway, okay. Well, and so how do we know, do they check for bats in the barns and like things that shouldn't be there in a herd that's getting ready for being a food supply?
Well, generally, like I said, farmers are very protective of their livestock. So if there's anything there that's going to cause them a problem, they're going to try to eradicate it. So as far as, like I said, most of your beef cattle are usually either outside being fed, at grain, or they're free ranging on grass or whatever. So like I said, a lot of folks think that all animals stay in the barn. They don't generally do that. Your dairy cows are obviously in the barn because they're being milked, but even they are let out, to graze during the day. So like I said, I don't think bats are a real serious issue as far as, I don't think, at least most of the farmers I know haven't said anything about that. So that's all I can speak to that. So.
Shoot, I'm frozen, I think.
Uh-oh.
Oh, there I am. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So one thing you said the other day that I thought was really cool that gave me a lot of peace of mind was how well the animals are taken care of, that become our food supply. And I thought that was beautiful. Would you just kind of enlighten people a little bit about that? I think a lot of people think that, we think of these feed barns and all this stuff that we see, propaganda, about how horrible and dirty it is, but it's not necessarily like that.
No, like I said, most farmers, like I said, there's bad apples in every group and in every genre of life. But I can tell you probably 98, 99% of the folks out there that are raising food animals are raising them in a healthy environment. They're taking care of their animals. They want their animals to grow and to produce, whether they're producing milk, whether they're producing veal, whether they're producing lamb, whether they're producing hogs, or whatever it is that the farmers out there trying to produce for consumption out there. They're doing their due diligence to make sure that they raise it well, raise it in a good environment. I think a lot of times you'll see the groups like PETA and folks like that will, they try to flip it and make more out of things than is there, or they go in and they create problems, because I understand they have done that as well. They've gone into, they've snuck in to farms and created problems that were not there either. So I can't speak to what they do or don't do. I just, heard from different folks have said that they have done that, and I've seen it locally. When they've done that, they've infiltrated some of the poultry farms here. So we try to, like I said, as far as what we do, I believe that most farmers, because I grew up, I'm a farm kid. My father still farms at 81. So I believe that most farmers have a heart and a soul and the feel for the land and for the animals, because they were trying to raise something that people are going to want to buy, want to consume, and they want people to know that they're doing their best, because if they're raising it for their family and feeding their families, they most certainly would not want your family to have anything less than what they would give their own family. So
I love that. That's beautiful. All right, and last question. I know Juice Plus made sense to you, and you decided to not only take that food supply for yourself and for your family, but you also decided to share it with a few other people. Will you share a little bit more about why that made sense to you?
Sure. I found my sister was the one who convinced me, Diana, convinced me to join, because she told me about the great blood work. My brother-in-law, his blood work, he previously had a stroke, and his blood work had improved so well. He was so excited that he had improved his blood work and had gone so well. So that really sold me there, because I believe that if you can turn someone who's already having issues, their blood work around, and they feel a lot better, then there's something there. So I started taking them, and when my children take them, which you know how kids are, sometimes they take them, sometimes they don't. They also find the same effect that I felt. I find that I do not get sick or as sick during cold and flu season. And for me, that's the biggest selling point right there. If you can feel good and you continue to feel good, and I can honestly say when I don't take my Juice Plus, I notice. So my body is that tuned to taking it. And my family, like I said, I believe in taking it, and I've got a few friends that have that are taking the gummies, but they also started drinking the shakes. They really like the shakes. So I think, like I said, across the board, you really can't go wrong. Juice Plus.
And it's super clean foods.
Yep.
Super tested.
Yep.
So coming from you, that means a lot for sure. And I think the other thing, kind of tying back into the whole virus subject, is, you know, we want to have our body basically healthy enough that it's inhospitable to disease wanting to take hold or a virus to take hold, so the immune system can fight it off. And getting the Juice Plus in helps us to really bridge the gap for getting enough fruits and vegetables. So
for sure, that it does. So,
okay.
Any
well,
other questions?
I don't see any other questions.
Okay.
So thank you so much. It was so enlightening. I loved it. And I really wanted to say thank you for just sharing your expertise and really opening up our eyes to what else goes on out there besides, you know, coronavirus, that there's other viruses, and, you know, that we're being protected from the top down. And I love that. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
Thank you.